Right now, at this exact moment, satellite imagery confirms massive secondary explosions at a covert Iranian missile production facility deep inside Syrian territory near the city of Masyaf. Israel is claiming responsibility for what they're calling a precision strike against advanced ballistic missile manufacturing infrastructure. Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps is threatening immediate retaliation. This isn't another routine airstrike in an ongoing shadow war. This is Israel destroying what Western intelligence agencies have been tracking for 3 years, a hardened underground complex where Iran was assembling precision-guided missiles specifically designed to overwhelm Israeli air defenses. The timing is extraordinary. This strike comes exactly 72 hours before a scheduled diplomatic meeting in Oman where Iranian and American officials were supposed to discuss regional de-escalation. Either Israel is sabotaging diplomacy deliberately, or they possess intelligence suggesting the facility was about to become operational and the window to strike it without catastrophic consequences was closing. Let me walk you through exactly what happened in the last 6 hours. At approximately 0247 hours local time on Tuesday, March 10, 2026, residents in the mountainous region surrounding Masyaf in western Syria reported hearing multiple explosions. Within minutes, videos appeared on Syrian social media showing massive fireballs erupting from what appeared to be underground facilities, with secondary explosions continuing for nearly 40 minutes. At 0312 hours, the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, a UK-based monitoring organization with sources inside Syria, reported that Israeli F-35I Adir stealth fighters had conducted strikes on Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps facilities near Masyaf. At 0345 hours, the Israeli Defense Forces issued an extremely rare public statement confirming the operation. The IDF spokesperson stated, "The Israel Defense Forces struck a significant Iranian weapons production facility in Syria. This facility was manufacturing advanced precision-guided missiles intended for transfer to Hezbollah and other Iranian proxy forces. We will not allow Iran to establish missile production infrastructure on our borders." At 0418 hours, Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps issued its own statement through the Tasnim news agency calling the strike a flagrant act of aggression that will not go unanswered and promising swift and decisive retaliation against Zionist targets. At 0520 hours, Syrian state media reported that Syrian air defense systems had engaged Israeli aircraft but provided no evidence of any Israeli losses. Commercial satellite imagery from Planet Labs taken at 0630 hours shows multiple large craters around the facility and at least 4 separate impact points, with thermal signatures consistent with continued underground fires. According to the Washington Post, citing 3 anonymous American intelligence officials, the United States was notified of the planned strike approximately 2 hours before it occurred, but was not asked for approval or assistance. Those same officials confirmed that American intelligence agencies had been tracking the Masyaf facility since 2023 and assessed it as actively producing missile components. To understand why Israel considered this strike urgent enough to risk major escalation, you need to understand what was happening inside that facility. According to analysis from the Institute for the Study of War, the Masyaf complex represents a significant evolution in Iran's regional missile strategy. For years, Iran has transferred complete missiles to Hezbollah in Lebanon and various militia groups in Syria and Iraq. These transfers are vulnerable to interdiction during transport, and the missiles themselves often have limited precision. What Iran has been developing at Masyaf is something far more threatening: the ability to manufacture precision-guided missiles inside Syria itself, eliminating the vulnerable transfer phase and dramatically increasing the volume of weapons that could be produced and deployed. The facility was reportedly producing guidance systems, advanced warheads, and solid-fuel rocket motors for missiles in the Fateh, 110, and Zulfiqar families. The Fateh 110 is a short-range ballistic missile with a range of approximately 300 kilometers and a circular area probable, the radius within which 50% of missiles will land, of just 6 to 10 meters when equipped with modern guidance systems. This level of precision transforms the weapon from an area terror weapon into a genuine military threat capable of targeting specific buildings, runways, or radar installations. The Zulfiqar represents an even more significant threat. With a range of 700 kilometers and similar precision guidance, a Zulfiqar launched from Syria could hit virtually any target in Israel, including the Dimona nuclear facility in the Negev Desert and sensitive Air Force bases. Intelligence assessments cited by Jane's Defense Weekly suggest the Masyaf facility had the capacity to produce between 30 and 50 guidance kits per month once fully operational. Over a year, that could mean equipping 400 to 600 missiles with precision capability, a number that would strain Israeli air defenses even with the vaunted Arrow and Iron Dome systems. The strategic significance extends beyond raw numbers. Dr. Afshin Ostavar, Associate Professor of National Security Affairs at the Naval Postgraduate School and author of Vanguard of the Imam, Religion, Politics, and Iran's Revolutionary Guards, explained in a recent analysis that Iran's strategy is fundamentally about creating irreversible facts on the ground. According to Ostavar, Iran learned from the 2006 Lebanon War and subsequent conflicts that Israel will accept considerable strategic discomfort to avoid major ground operations. By embedding missile production capabilities in Syria, Iran creates a situation where Israel faces a choice between accepting a growing threat or conducting the kind of massive military operation that carries huge costs and uncertain outcomes. The Masyaf facility represents the physical manifestation of this strategy. Built into mountainous terrain with multiple underground levels and hardened bunkers, the complex was designed to survive anything short of sustained bombardment with bunker-busting munitions. Israeli intelligence, according to reporting from the Times of Israel citing unnamed defense sources, assessed that the facility was approximately 6 to 8 weeks away from beginning regular production output. That timeline created the urgency driving last night's strike. Once missiles began flowing from the facility to Hezbollah and other Iranian proxies, the strategic calculus would shift dramatically. Destroying the facility before production commenced prevents the immediate threat while potentially limiting the scope of Iranian retaliation. Striking after production began would mean Iran and its proxies had already dispersed dozens or hundreds of precision weapons, making the facility's destruction less strategically valuable while providing Iran greater justification for major retaliation. The weapons systems Israel likely employed in this strike reveal the seriousness with which they approached the mission. Multiple reports indicate F-35I Adir aircraft conducted the operation. The F-35I is Israel's customized variant of the Lockheed Martin F-35A Lightning II, featuring Israeli-specific electronic warfare systems, communications equipment, and weapons integration. The F-35's stealth characteristics proved critical in this operation. Syrian air defense networks are among the most sophisticated in the Middle East, including Russian-made S-300 long-range surface-to-air missile systems and integrated radar coverage. The F-35's reduced radar cross-section, comparable to a small bird rather than a fighter aircraft, allows it to penetrate sophisticated air defenses that would detect and engage conventional aircraft. According to analysis from the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, the F-35 also provides Israel with critical intelligence gathering capabilities. The aircraft's advanced sensor fusion systems can map enemy air defenses, identify targets, and provide battle damage assessment without requiring separate reconnaissance platforms. The weapons employed were almost certainly Israeli-made SPICE precision-guided munitions. SPICE, smart, precise impact, cost-effective. Munitions use a combination of GPS and electro-optical guidance to achieve circular error probable measurements of just 3 meters even against hardened targets. The SPICE 2000 variant, which weighs approximately 2,000 pounds, features a 2,000-pound class warhead specifically designed for penetrating hardened and underground facilities. The sustained secondary explosions visible in videos from the strike suggest Israeli munitions successfully penetrated underground levels where missile propellant, warheads, or other explosive materials were stored. Each secondary explosion represents not just physical destruction, but also the elimination of materials that would have been integrated into precision missiles targeting Israeli territory. Here's what you need to understand about the broader strategic context that makes this strike so consequential. This operation occurs at a moment of extreme tension across the Middle East, with multiple interconnected crises creating conditions where miscalculation could trigger regional war. Iran is currently facing its most severe domestic political crisis in decades following the death of Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei just 6 weeks ago. The succession struggle between moderate President Masoud Pezeshkian and hardline elements within the Revolutionary Guard Corps has paralyzed Iranian decision-making at exactly the moment when clear leadership is most needed. According to Professor Suzanne Maloney, director of the Foreign Policy Program's Middle East Initiative at the Brookings Institution, this internal uncertainty makes Iran's response to Israeli actions extremely difficult to predict. Hardliners within the IRGC view any perceived weakness toward Israel as an opportunity to undermine the moderate government and consolidate their own power. The strike on Masyaf creates pressure on whoever ultimately controls Iran's security policy to demonstrate strength through retaliation, even if strategic logic would suggest restraint. At the same time, the moderate elements around Pezeshkian recognize that major escalation with Israel could invite American intervention and potentially threaten the regime's survival at a moment of maximum vulnerability. From Israel's perspective, this operation reflects calculations about both immediate threats and longer-term strategic dynamics. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's government has consistently articulated a policy of preventing Iran from establishing permanent military infrastructure in Syria. Israeli officials describe this as their campaign between the wars, continuous military operations short of declared war designed to prevent adversaries from achieving strategic breakthroughs. The Masyaf strike represents a significant escalation in this campaign because it targets not just weapons transfers or temporary infrastructure, but permanent production capability. Dr. Michael Eisenstadt, director of the Military and Security Studies program at the Washington Institute, argues that Israel's calculation involves several factors. First, the operational window was closing as the facility approached production capability. Second, the current Iranian political uncertainty creates the best possible moment to conduct major strikes, as Iran's ability to coordinate sophisticated retaliation is compromised. Third, Israel may calculate that demonstrating willingness to conduct deep strikes inside Syria despite sophisticated air defenses provides valuable deterrence against Iranian aggression. According to reporting from Israel's Channel 13, citing defense sources, Israeli military planners assess the strike would set back Iranian missile production capabilities in Syria by at least 18 to 24 months, providing a window where Israel could potentially achieve diplomatic agreements preventing reconstruction of similar facilities. The Russian dimension of this crisis cannot be ignored. Russia maintains a significant military presence in Syria and operates sophisticated air defense systems throughout the country. The fact that Israeli F-35s penetrated Syrian airspace, conducted sustained strikes, and departed without Russian air defense engagement raises critical questions. According to analysis from the Center for Strategic and International Studies, Russia and Israel have maintained a deconfliction arrangement in Syria since 2015 that allows Israeli strikes against Iranian targets while protecting Russian forces and assets. The arrangement requires Israel to notify Russia of planned operations and to avoid striking areas where Russian personnel are present. Last night's operation suggests this deconfliction mechanism remained operational despite recent tensions between Moscow and Jerusalem over Ukraine-related issues. However, Russian tolerance for Israeli operations in Syria has limits. President Vladimir Putin has repeatedly warned that Russia will not accept unlimited Israeli military freedom of action in Syria. The scale and strategic significance of the Masyaf strike may test those limits. If Russia concludes that Israeli operations are undermining Russian interests in maintaining influence over Syria and Iran, Moscow could begin providing intelligence directly to Syrian and Iranian air defense operators or even activate Russian-operated S-400 systems against Israeli aircraft. Such escalation would fundamentally change the strategic equation, potentially making future Israeli operations prohibitively dangerous. The American role in this crisis presents its own complexities. The Biden administration has been attempting to reduce American military commitments in the Middle East while preventing the region from descending into major conflict that would require renewed intervention. According to the New York Times, American officials were frustrated that Israel conducted such a significant operation just days before scheduled diplomatic talks in Oman. The talks were intended to explore whether Iranian and American officials could identify pathways toward reducing tensions, potentially including discussions about Iran's nuclear program, regional proxy activities, and sanctions relief. The Israeli strike complicates these diplomatic efforts by forcing Iran to demonstrate strength and potentially making compromise appear as weakness. At the same time, American officials privately acknowledged that the Israeli concerns about Iranian missile production capabilities were legitimate. Anonymous State Department officials quoted by Reuters suggested that while the timing was unfortunate, the United States shares Israel's assessment that Iranian precision missile proliferation represents a fundamental threat to regional stability. This ambivalence creates uncertainty about what American response would be if Iran retaliates significantly against Israel. Would the United States view such retaliation as justified response to Israeli aggression, or as Iranian escalation requiring American support for Israel? That uncertainty itself creates dangers, as Iran may miscalculate regarding what level of retaliation would trigger American intervention. We need to examine 3 potential scenarios for how this crisis develops over the next 72 to 96 hours. Each scenario depends on specific decisions by multiple actors, and the signals we observe in coming hours will reveal which trajectory is materializing. Scenario 1 represents de-escalation through diplomatic channels and represents roughly 30 to 35% probability given current conditions. In this scenario, Iran conducts limited symbolic retaliation, perhaps rocket attacks by Iraqi militia groups against American bases in Iraq, or increased harassment of Israeli-linked shipping in the Red Sea, that demonstrates resistance without causing mass casualties or threatening Israeli territory directly. Iran's moderate government emphasizes diplomatic outreach, perhaps using back-channel communications to signal that major escalation is not intended. The diplomatic talks scheduled for Oman proceed as planned, with both sides using the meeting to establish parameters for preventing further escalation. The United States plays active mediating role, potentially offering Iran incentives for restraint, such as limited sanctions relief or agreements on nuclear program monitoring. Israel accepts the limited Iranian retaliation without counter-escalation, viewing the destruction of the Masyaf facility as sufficient strategic victory. For this scenario to materialize, several conditions must hold. Iran's moderate government must maintain control over security policy decisions despite pressure from IRGC hardliners. Israel must resist domestic political pressure for continued strikes against Iranian targets. The United States must actively engage in behind-the-scenes diplomacy, offering both sides face-saving options. Russia must maintain pressure on Iran to avoid major escalation that could destabilize Syria further. Scenario 2 involves controlled military escalation and represents approximately 45 to 50% probability. In this scenario, Iran conducts significant but calculated retaliation that demonstrates capability without triggering all-out war. This might include precision missile strikes by Hezbollah against Israeli military targets in the north, attempted attacks by Iranian-backed militias against Israeli-linked assets in multiple countries, or even limited Iranian ballistic missile strikes against Israeli intelligence facilities. These attacks cause some Israeli military casualties, but avoid mass civilian deaths that would make Israeli restraint politically impossible. Israel responds with additional strikes against Iranian and proxy targets in Syria and potentially in Lebanon, creating a cycle of limited retaliation. Both sides engage in calibrated escalation, with each strike carefully designed to avoid crossing red lines that would trigger uncontrolled conflict. The diplomatic talks in Oman are postponed but not canceled, with both sides using third-party intermediaries to establish boundaries for the military exchange. This scenario essentially extends the campaign between the war's dynamic but at elevated intensity levels. The danger in this scenario is miscalculation. Even carefully calibrated strikes can cause unintended consequences. A missile malfunctions and hits a civilian area, intelligence proves faulty, and a strike kills unexpected high-value targets. An operation encounters unexpected resistance, and Israeli or Iranian forces take heavy casualties. Any of these developments could push the controlled escalation into uncontrolled territory. According to Dr. Bilal Saab, Senior Fellow and Director of the Defense and Security Program at the Middle East Institute, this scenario represents the most likely outcome because it allows both sides to demonstrate strength to domestic audiences while avoiding the catastrophic risks of all-out war. However, Saab emphasizes that maintaining control during tit-for-tat escalation requires sophisticated command and control, clear communication of red lines, and luck, and any of those elements can fail. Scenario 3 represents catastrophic escalation and has approximately 15 to 20% probability, low, but far from negligible. In this scenario, Iran concludes that limited retaliation would be interpreted as weakness at a moment when the regime cannot afford to appear vulnerable. The IRGC hardliners seize control of security policy and launch massive retaliation, including hundreds of missiles and drones targeting Israeli cities, military bases, and critical infrastructure. Hezbollah unleashes its estimated arsenal of 150,000 rockets and missiles in coordinated strikes designed to overwhelm Israeli air defenses. Israeli casualties reach dozens or potentially hundreds across multiple attacks. Israel responds with overwhelming force, conducting strikes not just against Iranian proxies, but against Iranian territory itself, targeting Revolutionary Guard facilities, missile production sites, nuclear facilities, and potentially leadership targets in Tehran. The United States is drawn into the conflict as American forces come under attack from Iranian proxies across the region, and Washington concludes that Israeli survival requires American intervention. Within 72 hours, American B-52 bombers, stealth aircraft, and cruise missiles are striking Iranian military infrastructure, while aircraft carrier strike groups position to deter Iranian attempts to close the Strait of Hormuz. Iran activates all regional proxy forces, Hezbollah in Lebanon, militias in Iraq and Syria, Houthi rebels in Yemen, creating simultaneous conflicts across the Middle East. Oil prices spike above $120 per barrel as markets price in potential closure of the Strait of Hormuz. Russia and China demand immediate ceasefire while providing intelligence and potentially military equipment to Iran. The scenario represents the nightmare that American and regional policymakers have worked to prevent for 2 decades, a regional war involving direct American-Iranian military conflict with catastrophic humanitarian, economic, and strategic consequences. Watch for 5 critical indicators in the next 24 to 48 hours that will reveal which scenario is materializing. First, monitor Iranian domestic messaging carefully. If Supreme Leader successor candidate Ibrahim Raisi or other hardline figures make public speeches emphasizing military response and martyrdom, that signals hardline elements are winning internal policy debates. If President Pezeshkian or foreign minister officials emphasize diplomatic channels and restraint, moderate elements maintain control. The language used matters enormously. References to crushing revenge or blood for blood indicate likely major retaliation, while terms like appropriate response or legal measures suggest more controlled approaches. Second, watch American military positioning. If additional aircraft carrier strike groups begin moving toward the Middle East, if American bases in the region go to heightened alert status, if families of American personnel begin evacuation procedures, these signals indicate Washington expects major escalation. The Pentagon doesn't move carrier strike groups casually. Such movements indicate intelligence assessments that significant conflict is probable within days or weeks. Third, monitor oil markets and shipping insurance rates. If oil prices spike above $90 per barrel and insurance rates for tankers transiting the Persian Gulf increase sharply, markets are pricing in substantial conflict probability. Markets aggregate information from thousands of sources and often prove more accurate than individual analysts in predicting conflict. Fourth, track Russian diplomatic communications. If Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov or other senior officials begin intensive shuttle diplomacy between Tehran, Jerusalem, and Washington, Russia is attempting to prevent escalation it views as threatening its interests. If Moscow instead withdraws diplomatic personnel from Iran or Israel, they possess intelligence suggesting imminent major conflict. Fifth, observe Hezbollah's public statements and military posture in Lebanon. If Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah makes public addresses threatening Israel, if residents report increased Hezbollah military activity in southern Lebanon, if Israeli communities near the Lebanese border receive evacuation warnings, these indicate both sides are preparing for potential Hezbollah involvement in the conflict. The destruction of Iran's Masyaf missile facility represents far more than another tactical strike in the ongoing shadow war between Israel and Iran. This operation hits at the heart of Iran's long-term strategy for countering Israeli military superiority through precision missile proliferation. Israel has drawn a line declaring that it will not permit Iran to establish permanent missile production infrastructure in Syria, even if preventing it requires strikes that risk major escalation. Iran now faces a crucial decision about how to respond at a moment of internal political vulnerability. The moderate government wants to avoid catastrophic conflict that could threaten regime survival. The hardline Revolutionary Guard elements view restraint as weakness that undermines their bid for power. That internal struggle will determine whether we're heading toward managed tensions or regional war. The diplomatic talks scheduled for Oman represent the best off-ramp available, but they can only succeed if all parties, Iran, Israel, and the United States, conclude that continuing the military confrontation serves no one's interests. The next 72 hours will reveal whether that calculation prevails or whether pride, domestic politics, and strategic miscalculation push the region toward the conflict everyone claims to want to avoid. I'm monitoring this situation continuously. I have access to satellite imagery providers, defense publications, diplomatic sources, and military tracking networks. When Iran announces its response, when Israel conducts follow-up operations, when the diplomatic talks in Oman proceed or collapse, when American carriers move or intelligence leaks about operational planning, you'll understand the significance here immediately. This analysis gives you context and framework that mainstream media won't provide because they lack the time, expertise, or will to explain the strategic complexities that determine whether we're witnessing routine Middle East tensions or the beginning of the regional war that reshapes global politics. Subscribe to this channel right now and turn on all notifications. Click that bell icon so you receive immediate alerts when critical developments break. You need this information, and you need it analyzed by someone who understands military capabilities, strategic theory, regional dynamics, and historical precedent. Hit the subscribe button now. I want to know what you're thinking. Drop a comment answering these questions. First, do you think Iran will conduct major retaliation or accept this strike and respond through diplomatic and asymmetric channels? Second, do you think Israel's timing was deliberately designed to sabotage the Oman diplomatic talks, or was the operational window against the facility legitimately closing? Third, do you believe the United States should be more actively engaged in mediating this crisis, or is American restraint allowing regional actors to sort out their own conflicts? I read every comment, and your perspectives inform how I think about these situations. The discussion in the comments section often reveals angles and considerations I haven't adequately addressed in the video itself. One final point before we close. The fact that this strike occurred now, at this specific moment when Iranian leadership is uncertain, when diplomatic talks were scheduled, when American attention is partially focused on other global crises, that timing is not coincidental. Someone in Israeli military intelligence concluded that this represents the optimal window for degrading Iranian capabilities while minimizing the risk of catastrophic retaliation. That calculation may prove correct. Iran may conclude that responding massively during a leadership transition would be strategically foolish, or that calculation may prove catastrophically wrong. Iran may conclude that appearing weak during a leadership transition is the one thing they cannot afford, and overwhelming retaliation becomes the only viable option. We're about to discover which assessment prevails. The missiles are flying. The threats are issued. The diplomatic channels are being tested. The next 72 hours determine whether this remains a manageable crisis or becomes the war that reshapes the Middle East. Thanks for watching.